Okay, guys. So we got all the throat clearing out of the way. We're gonna talk about the big one today. We're gonna spend several weeks on Marx. This is the first week on Marx, and there are so many ways to begin a unit on Marx. I said that I think last time, but I'm going to try again to begin a unit on Marx. And the first thing I'll do is I'll just reiterate a little bit of what we constructed last time, which is Marx's sort of intellectual grandfather, Hegel. And Hegel gives to Marx this really important idea, which is that freedom is creative self-actualization. Freedom is not simply being the absence of impediments to movement, which is what Hobbes sort of gives to Locke, and what our sort of modern idea of freedom is like, I get to do what I want. I'm not impeded by government, state actors, the police, whatever. That's what we think of as freedom, but that's not what Hegel wants to construct, and that's not what Marx picks up on. Freedom, on the other hand, is creative self-actualization. It's something coming out of you. You are able to do something because of your freedom. It comes out of you. It's not a negative freedom. It's a positive sort of freedom. It's not the lack of impediments. It's the ability to do something. And so Hegel sort of begins to construct this in a really beautiful way. And again, this is really boring, and it's perhaps it's boring, but it's difficult because Hegel's famously impenetrable. But I will just read this again because I like it and Marx loved it. And so this is what Hegel has to say. He says, the scene has often been pictured in which a blind person suddenly gains sight, sees the dawn, the growing light, and then the sun as it blazes up. At first, in his complete amazement, he forgets himself utterly in this pure clarity. But when the sun has fully risen, his amazement is lessened. He looks at the objects around him, and from them he goes on to see his own inwardness, and then with the relation of outer to inner. He proceeds from inactive contemplation to activity. By evening, he has constructed some sort of building by the use of his own inner sun. And when he contemplates it in the evening, he values it higher than that first external sun, for he now stands in relation to his own creative spirit and hence in a relation of freedom, because that spirit is related to itself. If we keep this image before us, we can see the course of world history in it, the great daily work of the spirit. So again, building this out, the first movement here, there's 6 important movements. The first movement is the awareness of outer. And if we join it together with the second, the awareness of inner, what we get is this idea that human beings are separate from nature. We have a sort of we have an inward reality, and there's an outward reality out there. There's objective and subjective realities. And when you join them together, you get something like the world, right? You have to have an observer in order to make the world out there real. It has to be observed. And so we are in a sort of relationship with this objective thing out there. The object needs the subject, just like obviously the subject needs the object. And so what ends up happening is we sort of observe nature, and we create an image of nature in our own head. It's not exactly like it, but we imagine the sort of structure that we need, right? So you can just imagine yourself, you're in nature, you're in the wilderness, it starts to rain, and you want shelter, right? And so you look around and you see a sort of rock overhang, and you think, oh, that's going to be a much better place for me to lay down than right in the middle of the field here. And so you do that. And then the next day, what happens is you think, well, maybe I can build a better rock overhang. I can build a better cave. I can construct something using my hands. So you've gotten the idea from nature, but you've done it in your own head, right? You've sort of using your reason, you've used your freedom, is what Hegel will eventually say, to create better nature, to turn nature into what isn't nature. And so this is the next phase, is that we transform nature, we use nature, but we use it to build something of our own making. We use it to build something of our own ingenuity, our own creativity. And then we turn around once we've constructed this building, this house, and we behold it, and we love it. We love it more than even the first image of nature. We fell in love with the sun, as Hegel says, but you can imagine this sort of shelter that we first saw. We revel in our ability to create something that's not nature, some art, right? And so we behold this, and we recognize how our own inner reality has become outer. Our subjectivity has become the object. Using our faculties, using our capabilities, right? Not only our brain, but our bodies. We've mixed our bodies with the world. And so through this entire process is the realization of our freedom, because what we have done here is we have used our ability to interact with the world around us and make it something greater than it was before. And so this becomes what Hegel, when Hegel says, like, when we look at this, we can see like the history of the world, the great daily work of the spirit. What Hegel's saying here is that man is the laboring animal, right? That like human history is the process of us laboring. And through that is where we sort of experience our truest, our greatest form of freedom. And so Marx picks up big time on this. The other thing that, but along with picking up several of Hegel's ideas, not only that, but several other ideas from Hegel, he breaks from Hegel in many really important ways, and we'll discuss several of them. But probably one of the most important ways that he breaks with Hegel is just his general idea of what philosophy is for. For Hegel, philosophy is retrospective. It can understand life only when it has grown old. He says here, the quote is, "Philosophy comes on the scene too late to tell the world how it ought to be." So it's a sort of like reflexive description of the world that Hegel wants philosophy to be. I think it's a mistake to ascribe Hegel a type of quietism. However, it's not extremely passive. It's not like a sort of passive, sort of like hands off, because for Hegel, philosophers tell us not only how the world is, but how it must be. The philosopher cannot predict the victories and failures of this or that political leader. It cannot say whether there will be a famine or a feast when the harvest is gathered. The philosopher's task is to uncover the meaning of what we do, to reveal how the desires and beliefs that make up our identities hang together in ways that ordinary empirical observation does not reveal. Philosophy does not compete with empirical, political, and social science. If anything, it competes with religion, which in Hegel's view does what philosophy does, but pictorially rather than rationally. Philosophy gives meaning to our lives. So, this is all maybe something that we agree with, but what Marx does is Marx says, this is a problem because philosophers have heretofore been content by doing this, by just giving us meaning for what has happened. They can only sort of, interpret the world, is what he says. The point is to change it, right? And so this is the sort of the move from philosophy to sort of political activism, that we might say, that Marx does. Marx is, I'm a little sort of like cagey about saying he's a political activist because he's famously anti-political, but like the idea here is that the philosopher is an active, makes active contributions to the train of history. That the philosophers move things along, shapes things, and they should do that. They shouldn't shy away from giving us the knowledge that we want to like move things forward, move things how it should be, right? Marx is not happy with philosophers simply telling us what is. Marx wants philosophers to tell us what ought to be, right? And so this is a big shift, right? This is sort of like Marx, like sort of reminiscent of Plato, maybe. But as I sort of told you guys, and we looked at this, what Marx does share with Hegel is this idea of freedom as creative self-actualization. And so again, we're going to create much more of this today. This is what today is about, is freedom as creative self-actualization. But before I do that, I'm going to spend several minutes giving you a background on Marx himself. So if the German government had not sent Lenin across its territory and back to Russia in a sealed train in early 1917, we might today regard Marx as not a very important 19th century philosopher. Not only was he a philosopher, he was a sociologist, economist, and political theorist. But as it were, Lenin was delivered back to Russia.
Sorry, why was he? Can you expand?
You want me to tell you the story of the
Yeah,
Russian
can you
Revolution?
expand on
Yeah, I mean,
expand on all that.
Okay, well, I actually want to have an entire class about like 20th century Marx, like a whole like this is what happened. This is what like Russia was. This is what the Soviet Union was. This is what Cuba
Isn't that what
was.
that's not what this class is?
This is not. No, this is Marx's idea, you know, and we'll spend a couple weeks doing that, and then we'll do like the political like what actually happened.
This whole class was an elaborate ruse to get.
So you tricked us because you made us think we were gonna get to.
What I will say about the Lenin thing is that the Tsarists essentially kicked Lenin out because there was anti-Tsarist sentiment. There was anti, like, you know, kings and queens kind of sentiment in Russia, and the Bolsheviks got more political power, and they started to create some problems, and the Germans wanted to seize upon this because the Germans were well at war. This was World War I, right? And so what they did is they sent the sort of most like firecracker hotbed political agitator that they had, you know, living in their country at the time, which is Vladimir Lenin, back to Russia because they were hoping that he was going to lead a political revolution and sort of dismantle Tsarist Russia.
Dude, was Lenin like aware that that's what was happening? He had to be, right?
He didn't yeah, of course, but he didn't. Great, you know.
Got it.
He'll take advantage of that, right? But we'll talk about that. I think it's a much more interesting story than I want to prepare a lot more and, you know, have slides and things. But like I said, I think that moment, that decision by Germany sort of springboarded Marx really into somebody that we all talk about all the time. He very much could have still been an important thinker, but his political impact is at least half of why we continue to talk about him, right? So that decision by Germany, it ends up being like one of the most politically ramificacious decisions in the history of the world. But so anyway, so I'm going to attempt to provide an introduction. Most of what I say next is by way of introduction, and further elaboration will come later today and in the next few weeks. A knowledge of the writing and ideas of Marx is virtually indispensable to an educated person of our time. Answering that charge at its most basic and crude level, why would I say that? Is because it gives you a leg up in many aspects. In business, because he demystifies the narratives that may convince you there's something else other than brutal exploitation and domination occurring in the modern market economy. And as such, it's your job to get yours. Marx tells us that. Marxism has profoundly affected ideas about history, society, economics, ideology, culture, politics. He is at his best when he's analyzing economically the system of capitalism. And he only rarely discusses anything else, really. So then how can I make the claim that he is, the simple economist of capitalism affected the fields of history, sociology, philosophy, ideology, culture? Well, the answer to that question is right there in the center of Marx's thought itself. It is Marx's contention that the economy is the living kernel of society itself. To grasp the truth about one's contemporary economy is to understand the most potent facts about one's society. Look at the economy first. It's the economy, stupid, right? That's Marxism. At its most basic level, Marxism tells us, look at the economy first, and then I'll tell you what's important about that society,
But yeah.
This idea, so this is like that idea, we might call that idea materialism. and it's the head that we say Marx turned Hegel up onto, because Hegel is the sort of idealist. Ideas move history. He would sort of chart history through like movements of ideas. God is important here. Rationality is important here. Marx says, fuck all that. It's all like, give me the economic system of each regime or of each period of history, and I'll tell you everything else you reasonably need to know about it. Who was in charge, what the ideas ended up being, God, the only reason God was important during that period of time after the during the Middle Ages and before the Reformation was because the system of feudalism required a sort of like devotion to an otherworldly reward, right? We can again, we'll talk about that when we talk. That's a whole separate class. But so anyway, that idea of materialism, it goes on in somewhat altered forms to influence the feminist waves, many strands of Black freedom struggle.
Is that why it's so like inherent into Christianity to like hate Marx because of that?
So there's a really famous turn of phrase in Marx where he says something like,
religion is the opiate
of the masses.
Yeah, totally.
And so that gets sort of like what he doesn't mean, right? What he doesn't mean is what it's usually interpreted as, which is like, oh, he thinks that like religion.
No, I get, yeah, I think
whatever.
Yeah.
It's
a control. Yeah, no, I'm pretty sure I have a well, yeah, okay, sorry, keep going.
No, yeah. Again, I think I want to like actually read where that comes from with everybody, but like, but yeah, I mean, like, Marxist political structures have been sort of atheist in principle,
Mm-hmm.
They're very much as a desire to remove impediments to thinking about the world, the real world, where we are with the feet on the ground kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
He's a materialist, he doesn't want us up in the air talking about spirits and again, I think we'll leave that for now. But so anyway, so no other intellectual influence has so profoundly shaped the mind of modern left-wing radicalism. The backdrop to the last 150 years of world historical politics has been Marx. This is all to say, not to be well grounded in the writing of Marx is to be insufficiently attuned to modern thought and self-excluded to a degree from the continuing debate by which most contemporary societies live, insofar as their members are free to discuss these issues. But so that debate I'm mentioning ends up being kind of funny to us because, one way to begin talking about Marxism is to talk about what Marxism isn't. The Marxism that inhabits the minds of our contemporary friends who've made a name, career, and fame deriding it is often not it's just not the Marxism I will attempt to sort of, so yeah, there's any number of these folks we can look at. What I think is interesting. So here's JFK. I'm sorry, RFK, right? So his son, this fellow's son, ends up is running for president now, and this is oh my gosh, blanking. The Red Scare. Who was the dude behind the Red Scare? The
McCarthy.
Yeah, right. This is Joseph McCarthy.
What's that? I want to know what that is.
So in like the 1950s, the Red Scare was this period in American history where there was an effort by leading politicians to root out communism and the influence of Marxism, and so many people. Some people were actually spies of the Russia of the USSR, and they were sort of exiled or executed, but many people were just sort of actors who had like left-wing ideas or whatever, who like wrote a book or like and there's a movie about it. But anyway, so that the Kennedys have Kennedy is not a friend to the left wing, I'd say. So anyway, what did I want to say about all this stuff? The distinction between the Marxism. So anyway, Marxism at once can mean an entire smorgasbord of loosely connected and sometimes completely contradictory descriptions and criticisms, depending on the criticizer. Debunking every label that has been attached to it, be it when the state does stuff, it creates poverty, it's against human nature, it's woke, etc. It wouldn't be the best way to learn about what it is. So we can like return to those criticisms once we've laid the foundation.
Great slide.
The distinction between the Marxism in the mind of haters and the Marxism on the page of his writings is paralleled in the very famous first line of the Communist Manifesto. He says a specter is haunting Europe. And he goes on to say, like, what is this specter, right? And so what do they actually think, these folks that you guys are so afraid of? And then he says, well, I'll tell you. That's how he begins the Communist Manifesto. But there's always been this sort of like this, from its very beginning, there's been this sort of like spooky aspect to Marxism that like seemingly most folks sort of are easily able to sort of identify as something we want to avoid and scapegoat and create a boogeyman out of, right? It's a popular and effective political tactic to be anti-Marxist to the extent that you can't really deduce whether some of these figures I have here actually believe what they're saying, or are they just wielding anti-Marxism to score political points, because those points are so easily scored. To the extent that even modern liberals, famously hate Marx and do nothing seemingly but talk shit on Marx, right? Marx surely has no friends among the right wing, but anti-Marxism makes strange bedfellows out of both the right and the left. The modern archetype of the liberal professor, right, is almost, and I could just tell you this from my own experience, which is the least valuable experience or evidence, but it is my own. I sort of learned Marxism through the lips of tens of liberal professors, left-wing professors who hate Marx.
Why do
so
they
interesting to me.
wait,
I
why
can't
do
wrap
they
my
hate
head around
Marx?
that, yeah.
Why do they hate Marx?
We'll talk about this. And so like I guess what I'm trying to say, so that like they are almost as hostile to Marx as you can be, only because Marx is hostile to them usually. But perhaps more so because Marx is hostile to their favorite topic. He has no theory of political authority, although he has great insights about how rulers bamboozle the ruled. He never gives an account of decision making under socialism. Because the state is to wither away, famously, as he says, he does not need a theory of citizenship. Because the law is a tool of the ruling class and was to wither away along with the state, he has nothing to say about the rule of law. Liberal academics hate this. Marx is anti-political, right? He doesn't have a sort of systematic theory of what politics is for, what it looks like. He's wishy-washy about their favorite topic, which is like tell me the ins and outs of the state, like who's going to decide what. Marx throws his hands up and says, that's not for me to decide. I'm sitting here trying to critique capitalism. You guys are interested in something else.
Interesting. So he doesn't even see himself as part of that debate, even though he inevitably ends up.
Yes, right. And it's perhaps it's a problem. Perhaps it's like a big failure of him, right?
I don't think so. I think that, sorry.
Well, so Marx, he shares the conclusion of Plato that once we solve the conflicts that arise over material interests, once we get the right, so Plato would say we're going to put the philosopher in charge, all the things that we bicker about are going to be solved. Marx says once we get rid of class antagonisms, we'll get rid of this haves and have-nots thing. Administration will be required after that. We're going to need an administrative level of society, but politics will cease to exist. We won't have to get together to bicker about anything.
And that's like in direct contradiction to like the current lib rallying cry
The
of like
libs love
life is politics.
This is exactly right.
Got it. Got
That's
it,
my
got it.
argument, at least,
Okay,
is
that
that
makes
Marx
sense.
is sort of like, he diverts what they want to talk about, right?
That makes
Um,
sense.
So this is all to say that Marx is not a liberal, and liberals hate Marx, which is like
Interesting.
my famous bug. Like it drives me crazy, right? Uh, so we'll articulate this much more. But Marx also has like a sort of foundational well, he has like a takedown of some like foundational liberal concepts, such as like private property, political rights as sacrosanct, freedom as non-interference, etc. We'll talk about all this later. And then, like I said, it's easy to score points, like democratic points, by sort of like shoring off your left side, your left flank. If you're a Democratic politician and you say like, oh, I'm not over there, like you're guaranteed a certain amount of support, right? And this, I think, is a result of the rise of neoliberalism in the 1980s. Thatcher and Reagan, that revolution really, it coincided with the fall of the Soviet Union. There was just a grand consensus across the world that liberal capitalism, sort of like center-right politics, was the answer to all of our problems, and this was the solution, and we're not really going to have to stray from this. The only way that a Democrat or a Labour politician in the UK ever got elected ever again was to be a sort of third way kind of politician, sort of mark themselves in the center, right? So that's Bill Clinton, that's Tony Blair, these folks right here. They have to repeatedly say, I am not a socialist. I am not a Marxist. I don't believe in that. I'm a capitalist, right? And so famously, we have even our lovely, lefty ladies in political power now can't help themselves but say, I am a capitalist. Trust me. I am not one of these folks that you're afraid of.
Wait, who are you referring to when you say that?
Yeah.
This is Pelosi here. Are you guys
Oh,
looking at the screen?
Yeah.
I
Pelosi's
am.
here, and then Elizabeth Warren here.
Oh, okay.
But you don't like those people though,
I don't, because they have to,
'Cause they're
because they're not
libs.
afraid. They're afraid to
That's why
'cause
you
they're
like
libs.
that's why you like AOC and the terrorist lady.
That's right. And then so this last little chart here, I don't know if you guys can read charts like these. To me, this is the sort of stuff I ended up having to read in my school. But
I'm trying to hold on.
this is like
Phys bios radical.
these are majors or like schools in a university, and what they're doing is they're trying to account for how many folks are in each school. There's 11% radical activists in like the faculty, right? This is professors.
Okay.
There are 13.5% activists in across the school, and there are 3% Marxist. There is a myth out there that professors are Marxists.
Right.
They're simply not. They love talking shit on Marx. It's their favorite topic. If you're a Marxist, you end up at a community college, maybe, lecturing at a sort of like what it's just it's not supported by the sort of mainstream academia. It's not like a valid position to take. So why is all this? I think the criticism of Marx, even me, I think the criticism of Marx that has the most merit is that his political theory is largely sketchy and unfinished. He lurches between cynicism and utopianism. He was a frustrated, failed academic with a professor's incapacity to finish anything properly. He wrote voluminously, had many deep and important unique insights, but he was unable to complete any project before being distracted by the next. And perhaps most disastrously for the world, the political vision he outlined was so persuasive and rang true for so many, and yet was sorely lacking in clear political instructions. It's a very common line of criticism. That the 20th century Marxian sort of revolutions may have painted Marx in a bad light. That's not real Marxism. What's going on in China. That's not Marx. Lenin didn't do Marxism, whatever, right? Stalin is not Marxist. You've heard me say things like that, right?
Yeah.
But Marx in many ways left them out to dry insofar as like implementation strategy or like what you would need to do in order to actually do this, whatever, right? Again, I want to do a sort of 20th century Marx class because I think you guys have things to say about it and I want to learn, and yeah. But there is a sort of incompleteness. There's a sort of like, this is so great, and then we want more, and you don't really tell us, and that might be a problem. So I said that somewhat shorter earlier, Maverick, and then you said you wanted to have something to say about that. Did you want
About
to say
what?
something?
Sorry.
About how like it might be a problem for Marx that he doesn't tell us what to do.
Oh,
or
you
like,
said that. And then I was gonna say I think that it's the reason he's so powerful is because
Oh.
he stays outside of the realm of that
Yeah.
kind of lower, or what he views to be secondary.
Interesting.
Secondary. Like the reason he's so powerful is because he's saying
He's like
coming
above
from this.
politics, and he's
Well,
right,
yeah. He's like, I'm coming from like a bigger perspective, I guess. So I was about to say like that's such a problem, and I wish that he would get more involved, but then I realized that like he's left it. He's created.
Well, he's dead, so he
other
can't get
people.
involved, Maverick.
He's created space for other people to
Right.
Sorry, but
build
your
on
dreams
that,
aren't going to come true.
Very good. So just a little sort of like biography. He was born in 1818. His family is Jewish, and so he was Jewish, right? But his father converted to Christianity so he could practice law in the face of Prussia's anti-Jewish laws. So he was born in Prussia, which is a sort of like
What is that?
pre-German Germanic state. So Germany was not unified yet. It was Prussia and several like tens of others like smaller states. And eventually what Germany unifies pretty recently, right? Like not long before World War I, Germany unifies. But Marx is born into Prussia, which is what ends up being the main Jewish or the main German state. The state that's most responsible for unifying the rest of them.
Okay.
He completes a doctorate in 1841 in philosophy. And like I told you guys, it's partly about Epicurean philosophy. Epicurus is a
flew too close to the sun.
Is a Greek.
Right? Isn't that Epicurus?
No.
That was Icarus.
There you go. Yeah.
Epicurus was a Greek god, Maverick. He was the one that he cast the whole world into like a frost layer, and then he came back like 100 years later and thawed the world and created corn.
No, Epicurus was an actual dude, and I've tried to learn a lot about his philosophy. I don't know a whole lot, but most of what it boils down to is like you should live with your friends.
Dude, the Epicureans, that's the Stoics, bro. He's the boy.
He's like anti-Stoic. He's like the
corn.
opposite.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So he's sort of he wants us to sort of revel in our pleasures, pursue happiness really to like its ultimate end.
I thought that was that other dude.
So he's like some hedonistic.
He's not Dionysus. He's not sort of hedonistic. He's saying like what he's saying is like that's what life's about. It's like about being happy. There is second order, like it's like you're going to be unhappy if you just drink, like it might make you happy in like the first order today, but you'll be unhappy later in life because you'll have ruined your ability to like, achieve higher pleasures, right?
Right.
He's not simple, right? There's a reasoned ability, but like he wants us to live in a house with our friends, minimize pain, just sort of be jovial and whatever. And so what I think like Marx kind of picks up this like sort of humanism, I think, this idea that like, oh, like we shouldn't be suffering on this mortal plane, right? That there's something to this idea that like we should sort of like minimize pain and pursue pleasure, right? But so that's all I have to say about that, I think. So he completes his doctorate, but he's too radical a thinker to obtain an academic job. And when I say that, I don't mean like he's going around talking about communism and whatever, but like this in Prussia at this time, it's a really repressed environment. You have to basically be a devout Christian in order to get any sort of public position, including a professoralship.
Oh, really?
And Marx is basically, Marx looks like a humanist liberal. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And Marx doesn't look any different than somebody who's talking about freedom and liberty and freedom of speech or whatever. Marx is like, the things that Marx has to say is not much different than that right now. It's certainly not much different to that than to like academic deans or even the state police. So you went to the academy to learn about Christianity, and so they weren't going to hire Marx. You had to be a particular kind of thinker to get a job at this time. So instead he becomes a journalist, and he writes on economics and politics. He ends up having to flee Prussia when his journal, the journal that he was publishing for, gets banned by the government for publishing economic treatises instead of stuff about Christianity and how God is good. And so he leaves Prussia and he takes up in Paris. And he writes many of his early works there, including the work that I wanted to focus on today. But he also writes on the Jewish question, which we'll talk about next week. But the reading for today is the Economic and Philosophic Manuscripts of 1844. During this time, he undergoes a lengthy study of what he and others call political economy. This is a word that's like loaded with extreme amounts of meaning for me and for others. What Marx means by political economy is the works of like Adam Smith, David Ricardo, James Mill, the economic thinkers of what we might call classical liberalism. So my sworn enemies at my PhD program were the political economists. They weren't sort of classical liberals, but what that discipline nowadays is, it's like a celebration of capitalism and discussions of the strategies and tactics they can pursue to use the mechanics of capitalism to more thoroughly crush and snuff out the flicker of humanity that still resides in our politics. And I hated them and they hated me. So does Marx. But anyways, the Marx's critique of political economy becomes his life's work. He ends up spending the rest of his life writing and writing and writing, critiquing political economy. That's what he has. He has in mind political economy. We could interject capitalism, just the sort of system of capitalism, all the sort of like attachments to it, the sort of philosophy behind it, the ideology behind it. Even down to the sort of the mechanics of it, right? The sort of system of inputs and outputs, profit and investment, etc. You could just read you could read capitalism when he says political economy. It culminates his critique of political economy. It culminates in Das Kapital, which is his last work. It's unfinished. The third volume of it is unfinished, and he wants to write a fourth even. His most famous work, Communist Manifesto, is co-written with the German philosopher Friedrich Engels, which we'll talk about. Friedrich.
So is this dude a Nazi or what? He's writing about the Jewish question. He's co-hosting with a German. It's like
he is German. Well, so Marx is Jewish. Is a Jewish German.
Yeah, right? But he converted away from Judaism.
His father, right?
So
we'll talk about the on the Jewish question is a really inflammatory essay. I'd want to hear you defend or tell me why it's anti-Semitic, because I think it is. But
Oh wow.
we'll
I was
talk
just
about
kidding, but
hell
yeah, dude.
So anyway, the revolution of 1848, there's a revolution in Germany in 1848, which Marx is sort of a part of the intellectual foment of. It fails, and he becomes a pariah, not only in Germany, but also in France and Belgium. And so he ends up having to move to London. And he spends the rest of his life in London, writing at the British Library. No, the library in the British Museum, I think, is what it is. There's like
how long was he there?
There's like a bench, like something like 50 years, 40 years, something like that. So we'll go back to Marx, but let's talk a little bit about Engels because now's the time to do it. He'll come up again later, but Engels was born the eldest son of the owner of a cotton textile firm, like a firm that owned cotton textile mills. They had two large-scale factories in Prussia and in England. Engels' education was cut short after grammar school, which is like high school. He graduated high school. It was cut short by his father, right, who wanted him to go into the family business. So Engels was a brilliant student. He was doing really well. He wanted to become an academic. He wanted to go to college, but his father says, "No, that's enough of that. I want you to become a businessman like me. We're going to start you working as a mercantile apprentice." He spent several years while he's young, being sent to and from his father's textile mills and trading houses, where he would, instead of like focusing on the work or like learning things about the business, he was like getting involved with like local political revolutionary groups and into trouble. He was like writing political pamphlets, and he's getting into trouble. He disappoints his father, gravely, by not showing the same interest in business that his father has. He goes on to disappoint his parents even more. He draws the ire of the Prussian police for his radical writings. Eventually he sort of takes up the businessman. He runs his father's company, but his heart is in other places, right? He sort of like wears the coat of a businessman, but he's not, many call him a class traitor, right? His relationship with Marx starts slowly, with each of them sort of sending each other letters and early drafts of work, but it blossoms into one of the most productive pairings of co-authors in history. He arrives at somewhat communist, or at least critical of capitalist thought, independently from meeting Marx. He's already writing sort of critiques of capitalism before he even meets Marx. He writes an article, he sort of writes an article for the magazine that Marx was publishing, detailing the poor employment conditions endured by factory workers, like of his father's factory. He eventually meets Marx, when Engels' parents send him to Manchester to apprentice at a factory, and on his way there, he stops in at the publishing house where he had just gotten that article published, and he meets Marx, and apparently they weren't very sort of impressed by each other. They didn't really hit it off immediately, but it takes, over the course of several years, they sort of send each other drafts of things they're writing, and it turns into this really beautiful relationship.
Beautiful, huh?
Yeah. Engels was a collaborator with Marx, and they wrote several pieces together, but even the pieces solely attributed to Marx, Engels has an influence. So much so that there's often a controversy whether there's a curious divergence or even interestingly clear passage in Marx. Sometimes in Marx, there's like your eyes glaze over, but then all of a sudden you can really understand something that he's being saying. And so a lot of people think, like, well, that must be where Engels is writing. Because Engels is a more clear writer, perhaps clearer thinker, but he's not quite as like biting and stylistic as Marx. Yeah, Marx is like a really sort of bombastic, kind of like inflammatory writer, and Engels is like kind of precise. He's a powerful philosophical mind. His contributions to Marx's thought are wide-ranging and important, but often highlight areas of capitalist critique that Marx himself overlooked or seemed to feel was didn't need to be expanded upon. These are some of his notable works. Probably the most famous is Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific, in which he sort of like distinguishes between the folks who think we need to like go door to door and like convince people. The utopian socialists are the ones that think like, oh, there's like a persuasive aspect to this. We need to be doing the political. We need to organize.
And is that because they believe that if only people knew, then they would agree?
Yeah, they think that. They also think that like the political work itself might be sort of worthwhile. really the main distinction is that the scientific socialists, of which Engels is saying he is, and if Marx is, scientific socialists, these people are going to join the winning side eventually once they sort of like once the revolution is at the gates, once they go to work and their brutalized like state is apparent to them. We don't need to be going door to door to convince them of that their job sucks and that they're being exploited. Like the revolution will pick them up. The train of history will either throw them on board or run them over or something like that, right? The idea behind scientific socialism is that it's a historical materialist idea. We'll talk about that. That it's just the train of history. It'll happen. It's the next thing after capitalism. We don't have to like worry about convincing people. Nobody had to go door to door and convince people to try capitalism. We didn't have to go do political organizing to like overthrow the kings. It just did it. Like the economics did it, right? People made enough money and overthrew them, and like that's what's going to happen this time too. That's the main diff. And so that's like a really clear, basically what this work is, Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific, is like a clearer version of Capital, Das Kapital, like the 3-volume thing that Marx wrote, which is like basically impenetrable. Engels writes a much clearer version of it, and it's called Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific. The other really important work is The Origin of the Family, Private Property, and the State. Marxist feminists picked this one up because Engels is like a champion of Marxist feminism. Unfortunately, he's somewhat of a womanizer. He sends letters to Marx talking about how he wishes he could just sort of like whore around, and he has enough money to like have a different girl with another time.
What kind of letter was it?
There's several letters where he just talks about how he's in love with a new woman every night, and he wishes he could just live this way forever. Like he wishes he didn't have anything else to worry about other than just like sleeping with random women, things like that.
I can hold that against him, He's just being honest with his friend. I just don't,
That's true, right? But so this work is really important.
Was there any like,
he didn't reveal himself to be like a sexual deviant or like a
He was a predator, Maverick. Him and Marx preyed on children together.
But so in this work, The Origin of the Family, Private Property, and the State, what he basically says is that the institution of marriage, the status of women as second-class citizens, these all go hand in hand with the production of capitalism. We need women at home taking care of the kids so that the men can go to work, so that there's enough money and there's enough ability to raise children so that they can be the next working force. And so we have to, as sort of like proponents of capitalism, be invested in this process that keeps women as secondary, as not as important. And so he sort of critiques that whole thing and says like, look, what you call modern love, what you call marriage, what you call the family, really is just a tool of the bourgeois state to reproduce the working class, such that we can exploit the children once they're of age, right? And so that's a really sort of like famous argument. He's a polyglot.
The children yearn for the mines.
He's a polyglot. He speaks and writes in at least 10 languages. He's an interesting guy.
10?
Yep.
That's insane. 10 languages?
There's more to say about them. Famously, the thing about Engels is that he sort of bankrolled Marx's like later life. Marx's mother writes a letter to Marx saying like, if only you made capital instead of writing about it. Like Marx is he's kind of a failure as far as like the monetary success. He's not able to sort of support himself and his family, but Engels is like sending him an allowance. Yeah, Marx has a family. It's a sort of a sad story. He ends up like having several children die early.
Oh,
not because they were like poorly cared for or something like that, but like, that's just the times, Anyway, so having said all that, let's move on to some of the important pieces of his actual thought. So again, this is all coming from the Economic and Philosophic Manuscripts of 1844. If there's time, I want to spend a little bit of time with a really interesting piece of work titled The Meaning of Human Requirements, which is in that work. But the main idea here is coming from the first essay in this work, which is called Estranged Labor. And so labor is being estranged somehow. Another word for that is alienated. In German, we sort of, when German to English is a really sort of difficult translation jump, and so there's lots of
on a different level of thinking.
There's a lot of meaning lost in that translation.
Higher
and so
thought.
Yeah, and so we try our best, but here we are. So this work, it was not studied up until about like 20 years ago is when it was really sort of discovered.
Really?
Early humanist Marx. This is
what do
before
you mean discovered?
Like people didn't study it. Like the folks that like do the work that I was doing, right?
Okay.
Like just like look, like read books. 20 years ago, they were not doing this. The professors I learned from did not know about this text until a decade and a half ago or so. Anyway, so this is early humanist Marx. He's a young man. Many people have, like I said, have overlooked it, but it provides I think it provides the latchkey to the entire thought. The first idea is the idea that we're sort of elaborating on the entire time. Marx is developing this idea of freedom as creative self-actualization. Freedom overlaps with economics. Freedom is realized in productive powers. So in other words, to speak of economics, to speak of our economic realities is to speak somewhat of whether or not how free you are, right? You have to understand, like there is a clear, there isn't any distinction whatsoever when you're trying to elaborate on how free your society is, how free you are. You have to understand what economic system is going on there. Tell me about the economics. In labor, we realize ourselves. We take nature, we craft it according to our own design, we behold it as an object, we lift ourselves up out of nature and become conscious of our own freedom. That should remind you of Hegel. But the quote I want to read from Marx goes like this. He says, the practical creation of an objective world, the treatment of inorganic nature, is proof that man is a conscious species being. That is, a being which is related to its species as to its own essence, or related to itself as a species being. To be sure, animals also produce. They build nests, dwelling places, the bees, beavers, ants, etc. But the animal produces only what is immediately necessary for itself or its young. It produces in a one-sided way, while man produces universally. The animal produces under the domination of immediate physical need, while man produces free of physical need, and only genuinely so in freedom from such need. The animal only produces itself while man reproduces the whole of nature. The animal's product belongs immediately to the physical body, while man is free when he confronts his product. The animal builds only according to the standard and needs of the species to which it belongs, while man knows how to produce according to the standard of any species, and at all times knows how to apply an intrinsic standard to the object. Thus, man creates also according to the laws of beauty.
Can you
What do you think about that?
TLDR that?
Dude, I think what he's saying, Brian, this is interesting, is that for someone that's railing against religion, I think that has like very like Abrahamic, Judeo-Christian like undertones, the whole thing in terms
that like
of
humans are special, right?
Yeah, this
that God
these
gave us ability
unique
to like,
conceptions of divine beauty and deriving meaning from it. That's really interesting to me.
That's great. I hadn't thought about it like that, but I think you're right. Yeah. I mean, and then so Maverick, I think the simplest way to say
maybe I'm
this.
too dumb. Like I can't. Yeah.
Well, he says that animals produce for immediate need, right? They're
Sure.
hungry, so they go kill an animal. They kill, so
Mhm.
they go forage, right?
Okay.
We do that, of course we do, but we also do something other than that, don't we? We labor in a different way.
Yeah.
There's and like Marx is trying to key in on what that difference is. Like it seems like we have a different purpose in mind. We
Ugh.
can do the animal thing, but we also do something greater than that, right? We create art or something. He doesn't
Right.
say that,
Okay.
but like,
Well, and he stops short of using the word divine, but I just can't help to shake that what he's saying is that like,
We're somehow special.
yeah, what
Yeah.
differentiates us from the animals is our ability to tap into the divine, to realize beauty, to actualize meaning, to blah, blah,
It's
blah,
like
whatever.
every one of these guys is obsessed about how we're different from the animals.
I think so.
Just-
I'm
they're
also
just
sort
so,
of like,
why is it such a
if I was going to write a book, it would have been about that. And like, and so I'm sort of constructing these dudes as like answering that question for us. Like a different person could have like put together Hobbes and Locke and Marx and stuff and like had it be on a different axis other than what kind of
okay?
animal are we?
Oh, right.
But like, that's my frame, that's my like, framework for like thinking about, because I like that question, that's just me. But
Oh,
I
okay.
think they
Okay.
do too. It's clear that they do.
Or it's
look,
like
he like wrote that.
something that every philosopher is required to answer in some way.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
It's like one of the tenets of being a famous philosopher.
right.
Okay. That's fair. I understand why. It just seems like, and maybe you're right. Maybe it's because everything I know about philosophy is from you, and you're like, this is your favorite question.
Yeah, and that's probably true. And so it just doesn't interest you. And so there's other things that we can talk about in regards to this. But like the idea here is that he uses the word that we produce universally, which is close to what Howard, I think you're talking about with like
Yeah.
spiritually or divinely, right? But so but this is how what Marx is saying. He's like hinting at Hegel, and he's trying to say that like this is unique to humans. And so this is how we sort of express our freedom. Animals are not free because when they're laboring, they have to adhere to their genetic instructions. Beavers build dams. Bees make a hive. That's like they get that from their necessity, from their genes. It's like direct lines. Whereas we can like sit down and like think for an entire day and do something that nobody's ever seen before, and like that, and like Marx thinks that that's pretty cool.
Okay. Right.
And that's freedom. That's freedom, is like doing something that nobody's ever seen before. A bee can't do that. At least that's the claim, that's like what they're saying. So having constructed that, that's important. That's cool. We should hone in on that. There's a problem here because like we're doing something that's sort of preventing that. We've sort of constructed something and put it on top of modern life, and it's preventing us from doing the thing that makes us free, isn't it? And so he sort of develops this idea of alienation. In other times he calls it estrangement. But the important part is that it's estranged labor, right? And there's 5 ways in which we are estranged. We experience estranged labor. That capitalism estranges our labor, alienates our labor. I'm going to start using alienates because I always have a hard time saying estrangement. The first way that capitalism alienates us is that we are alienated from the object of our labor. So the example is the factory worker who builds a machine but who does not own the machine. He's tormented by the machine, actually. His labor is in this machine, but he has no claim to it, right? He must access it, though, however, in order to work and live. So this is the quote. He says, the worker is related. So this is all under capitalism, right? So this is the sort of preface. The preface to everything he's about to say for the next 7 slides is like under capitalism. The worker is related to the product of his labor as to an alien object. The externalization of the worker in his product means not only that his work becomes an object, but an external existence, but also that it exists outside him independently, alien, and autonomous power opposed to him. The life he has given to the object confronts him as hostile and alien. So this is a little strange. But basically the idea is that like, have you guys ever seen Charlie Chaplin Modern Times?
No.
Nope.
The first like few minutes of it is like Charlie Chaplin on like a conveyor belt with like a bunch of other dudes, and he's like doing this. And he's making little widgets. You don't even know what he's making, you know. 7 other people are on the thing, and they're all like doing something, making these little things that are like whizzing past them, and they have to like cinch them or something. That might end up being an airplane, right? But like they don't see that, right? They're not a part of that. They're part of one tiny little process. And so when they confront that airplane, it's alien to them, which is a bastardization of the freedom through, you know, contemplating your house and making it in the world. It's a reversal of that. It's a complete departure from that. It's a terrible departure from that, right? Because like it's a part of who we are to sort of revel in like the things we make, you know?
Yeah, totally.
But instead we like are,
wait. Okay, so
we make one tiny little piece of a machine. And then once we actually are confronted with the thing we've made, it's this horrible monstrosity because we've only made one tiny bit of it.
What separates us from the animals is our ability to create, to labor in this creative way.
Mm-hmm.
And then because of capitalism, the inevitable result is that we end up giving up our nature.
Yes, dude, hell, that's Marxist alienation. Alienated labor for Marx is
okay. I finally understand that.
It
took
you
you
fucking
10 years
got
to
it.
explain that to me.
It's like, it's more, you know, there's more ideas here, but like that's in essence the idea, is that capitalism sort of bastardizes this like innately human thing, you know. The second way we're alienated is we're alienated from the laboring process. And this is what he says. I love this. He says, the worker therefore feels at ease only outside work. And during work, he's outside himself. He is at home when he's not working, and when he is working, he's not at home. His work, therefore, is not voluntary, but it is coerced, forced labor. It is alien. Its alien character is obvious from the fact that as soon as no physical or other pressure exists, labor is avoided like the plague. And so, like, you have to understand the sort of like the irony here is that he has just sort of told us how wonderful laboring is, like how human it is, how it's like what he wants, you know, like we labor as human beings. But as soon as we are given the ability to not do it, like if you're given I don't know how much money you guys need, $5 million, you might take a year off, right?
Yeah.
I don't know.
If you gave me 10 million, I would take maybe a year off. Maybe not.
And like Marx is like, that's not what we're supposed to do. We're not supposed to be like sort of like hate that, you know. Well, I don't know, like hate laboring, like hate working, you know. We're supposed to sort of find ourselves in our work. We're supposed to be realizing our creativity, expressing our freedom, you know. We're supposed to like revel in the house we constructed, right?
Yeah, totally.
Can I ask you a question about something kind of off topic here? How prominent was Freud right now when he released?
I think Freud comes later, much later.
What year was it?
So
sorry,
I have to look it up. I think Freud is early 1900s.
Yeah. What year is? Sorry, what year is?
This is 50 years before that. This is This is 1844.
Okay. Sorry. It's very interesting because he's really talking a lot about psychology here in a way that, you know.
Yeah.
He's really being a psychologist or maybe some socio. He's being
And this is rare for Marx. Marx will eventually, he's a young man right now. Eventually he becomes much more of like a hard economics scientist kind of guy, but this is like, it's like interesting, right? This is like a good.
He's so
lens into
upset.
the mind.
Can you talk about that a little bit? Like, why is this dude so bummed out?
Yeah. I mean,
every picture of him is so hard.
I'm always really struck by that, this like turn of phrase. The worker feels that he's only outside work, and during work he's outside himself. Right? You're like,
yeah, totally.
You're
Can
not
you explain
yourself.
why can you just break down this idea of forced labor one more time? Because I have a hard time understanding why he's saying it's not voluntary. What's his logic there? Maybe I'm just missing the logic.
Yeah. Well, at first what he's saying, I think it immediately presents to us as like, he is miserable when he's working, right? And so like he otherwise wouldn't do it. And so like there is some sort of coercion taking place here, obviously, right? Like if it was voluntary, he wouldn't be miserable, I think is part of the logic. But it's forced, and like there's other writings that sort of reveal what he actually thinks about this, and he might not have this in mind at this point, but the idea is that like you can't just go give up your job. You can't quit. Like there's like he would say to somebody who says, "Oh, if you don't like your job, just quit." You know, capitalism is a great system because it's based on this idea of like mutual agreement in contract. You know, like I enter into a laboring contract with you. I didn't have to do it. And so Marx would say like, no, you had to. Of course you had to. What are you gonna do? Not work?
Okay.
You're gonna starve.
Whether here or there.
Yeah, exactly.
Got it. Okay. All right. And also,
I'm not sure if that's what he has in mind right here,
well,
but
he's
he
also
otherwheres who says
if
that.
if it's fundamentally against our nature, then doing it is therefore not voluntary.
Right.
Yeah.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah. That actually might be exactly what he's after here, because he has just gotten finished talking about our nature, right? He elaborates this idea on 62. I wonder if I have this exact quote. Do I have more of it? No, this is exact. Yeah, this is great. This is just an extension of this idea, the same idea. External labor, labor in which man is externalized, is labor of self-sacrifice, of penance. The external nature of work for the worker appears in the fact that it is not his own, but another person's, that in work he does not belong to himself, but to someone else. It is the loss of his own self. So what this is getting at is, so if we have this like image of the airplane factory where like there's one guy making one widget, and he can't sort of like behold the whole airplane as the thing that he's made. There's that loss, the loss of the ability to sort of like think of like sort of creatively think of something and then make it into the world, is like what he's after here. He's like that's somebody else's vision that you're working towards, and it's never going to be as satisfying as doing it yourself. And like you can't do it yourself. You don't have the access to the tools or the machinery. You don't, like, you're a worker. You know, like you don't have that. And so it's like, oh, it's this is like externalization of labor being embodied in somebody else. And so this is all part of the second idea of alienated labor, which is alienation from the laboring process. The third idea is alienation from his own nature. And again, we've already sort of constructed all this. So they're all kind of bleeding into each other, but like that's kind of the way that Marx writes a lot of the time, to be honest. Alienation from his own nature, his own species being. Species being is just a way to say human nature. There's like, and it's this idea that we can conceive of ourselves as a member of a human species. And when we do something, we might do it for the entire humans. We might do it for humans. We're not doing it simply for ourselves or even our immediate family. Sometimes we do things for the whole species.
Wait,
and
is
Marx
that a literal statement, or is that like a metaphorical statement? Like, i.e., we truly do things for
Only
and
rarely do we do this. But I think what Marx is after is like this idea of art that we're kind of saying.
yeah,
Like
that's what
we
I'm
might do
saying.
it. Yeah.
But so it's metaphorical. It's not. He's not saying that like literal. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think he would be so. Obviously, I don't like on my day-to-day life. I'm not like sort of like thinking about.
Well, I guess I'm more thinking of like this concept of like grand, abstract, impersonal sacrifice, right? Like the Jesus concept, the like I'm sacrificing myself for the climate. I'm sacrificing myself
Yeah.
for the greater good. I'm sacrificing myself for my community. I mean, even community is too personal, I think, of a concept for what I read into that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what he's after here. Is that like we kind of do that.
Got it.
And it's in our nature to think that way, he thinks. And
Got it.
yet under capitalism, there's a problem arises. There's a sort of bastardization that happens here. And so this is what he says. He says, in taking from man the object of his production, alienated labor takes from his species life, his actual and objective existence as a species. It changes his superiority to the animal to inferiority, since he is deprived of nature, his inorganic body. There's another way to say this, because I know that that's like strange. The other way to say this is that the worker, this is what he says. He says, the worker does not affirm himself in his work, but denies himself. He feels miserable and unhappy. He develops no free physical and mental energy, but mortifies his flesh and ruins his mind. And then that's the rest of that is the worker therefore feels that he's only outside of work. During work, he's outside himself. So again, it's in our nature. It's in our nature. To create things for the enjoyment of, not only for our own enjoyment or for our immediate families or whatever. He thinks that we have a communal sense, that we have a sort of species life.
Yeah.
And when capitalism gets in the way of that, we have an inability to do that anymore, or at least it becomes a sort of like extra human thing. We tend to think of these folks as spiritual leaders, right? Who end up making sacrifices for the greater good or whatever. We end up like treating them as like godly figures. And so we end up becoming less than animal because it is our nature to do it, but we're not doing our nature. And we're not even doing the things that bees do, right? The bees make hives. We're supposed to do like great sort of communal works, and yet we're not doing that. And so that's the sort of logic there. I think I already put that there. Alienation from nature itself. And then so this was going to be my contribution as like a scholar. Like one of the things I wanted to do is say like, no, he actually thinks that we're being alienated from nature itself as well. Because in every textbook that is written about this book right now, everybody says there's only 4 types of alienation. There's, from the object of the laboring process, human nature, and then the last one is from others. Like here's like the last one's others. But I think that there's a fourth one, the fourth out of 5, a fifth, whatever. And which is that we're alienated from capitalism, alienates us from nature, not from our human nature or like our species being whatever, but from nature, from just the thing that's like out there, right? It would be really boring to sort of like go through it. I don't even have a good sort of like thesis. The basic idea is that like we're in a metabolism with the natural world such that there really isn't a clear distinction between what we are and what nature is. There's an interdependence. And so when we're denying ourselves, when capitalism sort of like makes us into that thing that is separate from nature because we're like having to use it as an object, what we're doing is we're alienating ourselves from nature. And so and such that it makes it easy for us to dump trash into the forest, extract oil from the tar sands in Canada or whatever, right? It makes it easy for us to do the things that like we might otherwise not do, because capitalism sort of makes it apparent that like, well, no, actually you're not nature. you're something different, right? And so that's like, that was the idea. Lastly, alienation from others. This one is like perhaps the easiest one to see. We're the alienation of man. We're alienated from the capitalist, right? So the worker is like alienated from the owner. That's very simple. But like, we're also alienated from our fellow workers. We see each other as competition. And this is what he has to say. He says, the product of labor does not belong to the worker, and an alien power confronts him. It's possible only because this product belongs to a man other than the worker. If his activity is torment for him, it must be the pleasure and life enjoyment for another. Not gods, not nature, but only man himself can be this alien power over man. So he says, like, it's just simply like doesn't make any sense that we would otherwise do this thing that we do, which is like pit each other against each other in a ruthless competition that sort of like denies, each other's humanity, and we we sort of must step on top of each other in order to get ahead and things like that. What I like to do when I'm teaching this to the students is I show them Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times, is because there's like one scene where like Charlie like is going too slow and he like prevents the people ahead of him from doing their work, and then they start fighting and stuff like that. Anyway, so having said all that, that's alienated labor under Marxism. There's still an outrage. There's more. There's more to the story. There's actually a further problem here. The outrage of modern capitalism is that all this is true, and yet we are creating something wonderful for some people, aren't we? He says the worker becomes poorer the more wealth he produces. The more his production increases in power and extent, the worker becomes a cheaper commodity the more commodities he produces. The increase in value of the world of things is directly proportional to the decrease in value of the human world. So this is like really strange, because normally we think about things in a completely opposite way, don't we? We say, the harder I work, the more money I make, right? Like, or we say like, if I produce more value for the company I'm working for, they'll reward me. I'll get a promotion. I'll get a bonus, right? And he's not saying that like that doesn't happen, but he's saying actually something interesting, which is, I wonder, do you guys know what he's saying? It's nobody ever gets this.
Hold on. Let me sit here and consider it for a second.
How could it be that the worker becomes poorer the more wealth he produces? How could that be?
Because I see two potential answers. The first answer, I guess the most rudimentary answer that maybe is the furthest from what he's trying to get at, is that as the worker generates more power through capital for the capitalist that controls him, he becomes more of a disposable commodity.
Exactly.
He puts himself out of a job. That's
exactly. Fuck yeah. How'd you guys get that? Nobody ever gets that.
The increase in value of the world of things is directly proportional to the decrease in value of the human world.
Yeah.
And the human world, you just explained to us, is species kind, or whatever the fuck you just said. His well-being as a person.
So the folks,
really good example of that is
ChatGPT, right?
That's one good example for sure, but a more direct one is Eric Rector's father.
Oh.
Tell me why.
Oh, hell yeah, that's exactly right.
Eric Rector's father is an extremely good businessman. He's a real estate agent. He owns other businesses, whatever. And one of the things is Eric, his son, who's having a hard time get a job and having a hard time support himself. Eric's like, oh, well, I'll hook my dad up with Maverick as a business contact. So his dad calls me and he's like, he just pitches me hard on virtual assistants and his company's ability to do the operations for companies like mine. And then as a result, I fire his son.
Because he can hire a guy in India to do Eric's job for.
So because he did such a good job selling his services to me, he lost. It wasn't directly himself, but he lost his son.
It is really close. Yeah, right.
That's
That's
that kid.
That's pretty close. Yeah,
That was
that's
weird
pretty close
side.
to the idea here.
Well,
But
I forgot to talk to
I'm
him.
really happy that you guys got that. That's really cool. It
I
was
think
hard
it's
for me
also
to
because
get.
we're 35.
Yeah,
You know, I think that's really the big thing here. Again, we've worked our whole life. You know,
so the example that I always give is like a bagger or a checker at a grocery store. You know, they do a really good job. I know this is really simple and it doesn't work this way, but like they do a really good job and they make the owners of the grocery store a ton of money, and then so they use that money to invest in a self checkout. You know, and then they fire the cashier. That's a that's the analogy I always say, or the story I always tell. And yeah, and so that's kind of like that's like the outrage that like you know, we're sort of like, what are we doing this for? You know? And then so you know the other sort of side of the story is like is that again, like there are winners here, right? You know, and so he says that to be sure, labor produces marvels for the wealthy, but it produces deprivation for the worker. It produces palaces, but hovels for the worker. It produces beauty, but mutilation for the worker. It displaces labor through machines, but it throws some workers back into barbarous labor, and it turns others into machines. It produces intelligence, but for the worker, it produces imbecility and cretinism. Have you ever had a job that like produced imbecility and cretinism in you?
yeah,
I always ask this of the students.
Of course.
I think it's funny.
Dishwashing.
Produce imbecility.
Or like any job will do that if you're working hard enough. If you're forced to do it long enough, you know. My job that I like sometimes, you know.
Yeah, it kind of like makes you slow. If at the end of the day, you're like,
yeah, like if I stare at an Excel spreadsheet too long,
yeah,
I can't do math anymore.
That's because it produced imbecility and cretinism in you.
Yeah, and again, so this maybe I should show it to you guys next time. But the Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times, there's like a break, there's like a bell that rings, and he's able to go on like a 2-minute break, and like so he's doing this, and then the bell rings, and then like he like moves off the line, and he's like still doing it as he like walks down towards the bathroom, you know. And so like that's like
he's got like Tetris.
Yeah, the Tetris effect. Yeah. Right. So like it turns us into a machine, right? Well, so it's 8:30. Do you guys want to like?
I'm in so much pain. I'm not going to the meeting, so I'm happy to stay on here.
Okay.
Is it? Is it your?
My tooth is just going crazy. So once this is done, I'll try to go take some more ibuprofen, then try to go to sleep.
Damn, it's that bad.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, dude.
It's all good.
It's like infected or what?
That's what I was just thinking in my head. I was like, it has to be infected. There's no, it's.
Yeah. Do you need to go to the doctor right now?
No, I can make it one more day.
Okay.
I'm not sure if I need to go over. So objectification of labor is, we kind of already talked about it. You know, basically just like our labor becomes, well, the Marxist term is objectified. It's like no longer a part of us. It's, you know, bought and sold and paid for by somebody else, and it like becomes the sort of like object of our own alienation. And so we hate it, and so we avoid it. You know, like we talk about how wanting to like not work. You know, Marx doesn't want us to be like unemployed and like, you know, like eating grapes for our entire lives. He thinks that it's like a human thing to like make things in the world. But that's all we want to do. We want fully automated luxury spelled communism, you know. And Marx would be like, that's not what I want you guys to do. You don't want that. So the evil of private property. Well, we're going to talk about this next week, actually, in the Jewish question. But the idea here is that like all the problems for the worker become the sort of like the benefits of the owner, right? The non-worker, such that the sort of product of our labor, the thing that the end of our objectification, the end of our estrangement, the end of our alienation is the private property of the owner. And so this is like, it's just a sort of like, it's an interesting thing because he goes on and says that like, there's actually a way the way to overcome this is by like taking that private property and making it into human property, which he actually deems it social property, which is the other kind of property that you can have. And so this sort of brings to mind, it's reminiscent of the thing that Debs says last week. Debs told us about socially owning the products of our labor. And so again, I'll just say the quote here: the tool has been socialized, through history. We've like arrived at this ability to socialize the tool. The tool has been socialized. Production is socialized, right? We all have to sort of like be a part of this process in which we're all working. And now ownership must also be socialized. In other words, those great social instruments that are used in modern industry for the production of wealth, those great social agencies that are socially made and socially used must also be socially owned. And so the expansion of private property to universal property, universal private property, is communism. This is like his first pass definition of communism. We get it when he's a very young man in this text. He says, communism is ultimately the positive expression of private properties overcome. Immediately, it is universal private property. The condition of the laborer is not overcome, but extended to all men. So again, what are we talking about when we say private property? We're talking about the factories. We're talking about the things that produce wealth, right? The things that like, we're not talking about
your
a
home.
car even. Yeah, even like he probably would have a problem with owning land privately, but like you might end up with a home, like he doesn't, necessarily think that you should live with people you don't want to live with or whatever. It might be better suited to have a sort of like you're assigned to that building or something. Or like your community has we've all come together and divvied up the place, the dwellings this way. But yeah, it's not like we have to share toothbrushes or the state. It's not like the state is going to come by and like.
So who gets? I know today isn't about this, but so
Yeah.
who gets the good dwelling?
Right. Yeah. Who gets the place on the cliff?
Who gets the place on the cliff
Totally.
overlooking the ocean, and who gets the one in the?
That's the frustration, man. He just doesn't think it's important. He just thinks that like once we get rid of these antagonisms, these things that are pitting us against each other and like making us in competition or whatever, we're just gonna naturally sort that out.
But
like,
that's not real.
I know. It's probably true. And like, yeah, I agree. It's like he maybe should have said something about that, right? We'll go into like what he said. Like he has like actual actionable items, but like they don't get to that granular level where we kind of want them to be. But so this is only the first step though. This idea of like extending private property to the universal. This is only the first step to a more fundamental transformation, which is the reintegration or return of man to himself, the overcoming of human self-alienation, the restoration of man as a social, that is a human being. So there's this sort of like wonderful like humanism in Marx. Like he loves human beings and he thinks we're special, and he is horrified and outraged that we're not living up to ourselves under this current economic system, right? And so this is like this is him as a very young man. He's sort of like, it's a rather remarkable achievement that he has all this here. He goes into much more detail and in some ways more persuasive directions later, but it's a nice piece where he sort of like gives us new ways to sort of think about like what's actually going on when we go to work, right? There's one other thing. I mean, do you guys want to talk about anything before we move on to a separate topic that'll only take 10 minutes or so?
No, I mean, I'm pretty fucking fried out. I gotta be honest with you.
Give me 10 minutes.
Okay.
So in the same work, but it's like a separate essay. It's called On the Meaning of Human Requirements. He has this to say. He says, in a sane world, we produce in order to satisfy needs. Under capitalism, we stimulate needs in order to maintain production. The reversal of ends and means, right? Like our economic production is oriented towards ensuring that we can continue production, not ensuring that the end result of our production is the satisfaction of human needs, right? It's a sort of illogical, irrational way to organize an economy, he would say. Not only that, but capitalism teaches people to identify with false needs and feel ashamed of real needs. Needs are multiplied and eliminated at the very same time. And so what does he mean by that? This always hits me really hard. I'm not sure if it'll hit you guys, but it's actually very like the things that like you guys like to make fun of me about, like being frugal, taking the train, or whatever. He like it might not hit you, but it hits me. He says this. He says, thus political economy, and remember, like I said, he means capitalism, despite its worldly and wanton appearance, is a true moral science, the most moral of all the sciences. Self-denial, the denial of life and all human needs. It's its cardinal doctrine. The less you eat, drink, read books, the less you go to the theater, the dance hall, the public house, the less you think, love, theorize, sing, paint, fence, etc., the more you save, the greater becomes your treasure, which neither moths nor dust will devour, your capital. The less you are, the more you have. The less you express your own life, the greater is your alienated life. The greater is the store of your estranged being. Everything which the political economist takes from you in life and in humanity, he replaces for you in money and in wealth. And in all the things which you cannot do, your money can do. It can eat and drink. It can go.
Oh no.
Brian, you just cut
You
out.
cut out, Brian.
Political
Brian,
power. Yeah.
You
start
muted
that sentence
yourself.
over.
Can you rewind?
Oh no.
Just
Yeah.
one sentence.
One sentence, you think? Everything that the political economist takes from you in life and in humanity, he replaces for you in money and in wealth. And all the things which you cannot do, your money can do. It can eat and drink, go to the dance hall and the theater. It can travel. It can appropriate art, learning, the treasures of the past, political power. All of this, it can appropriate for you. It can buy all this for you. It is the true endowment. Yet being all this, it is inclined to do nothing but create itself, by itself. For everything is, after all, its servant. And when I have the master, I have the servant, and do not need his servant. All passions and all activity must therefore be submerged in avarice. The worker may only have enough for him to want to live, and may only want to live in order to have enough.
Sounds like it's very biblical. The way
he kind of writes that way. Oops, I kind of so that always hits me because like
yeah, that was heavy.
I have the morality of what Marx is saying that capitalism is teaching us, which is that we should save, we should be frugal, we should do less. It's moral for you to not be a human being, to not like indulge. Right.
That wasn't, yeah, I did hear that, but that wasn't what hit me. What hit me was more this concept of like living your life to make more money, but then even once you have the money, you spend your life just trying to make more of it.
Right. Yeah. And so again, he says needs are multiplied and eliminated at the same time. Like your need to be, a sort of human that wants culture or whatever, right? Like it becomes like a sort of superfluous thing, like, oh, that's not important. What's important is that I make more money,
Yeah.
Right. And he thinks that like this is sort of strange. It's like we all like recognize this in ourselves. Why would we do this? These practices intensify alienation in every aspect of our lives. And so what's the alternative? We need to distinguish between genuine and artificial needs and to formulate our own needs. And so again, I said this. He said, in Marx's view, capitalism is built on relations of unequal power. It alienates workers from themselves. It's deeply irrational. His critique of capitalism inspires us to construct a better alternative, a society in which people can express their needs without shame, satisfy their needs without hindrance, and respond intelligently and compassionately to the needs of others. Communism is the name for this society constructed by human beings for the fulfillment of human needs. Under communism, people take charge of their circumstances. They no longer resign themselves to conflict, scarcity, exploitation, and stultifying labor. So that's this. It's a very short work. I really like it. The Meaning of Human Requirements. That was the argument in short. So anyway, so that's it for today. Next week, we're going to read probably his most like controversial probably article. It's on the Jewish question. We'll see what happens. I think it'll be fun. Anyways, thanks guys.
Nice, bro.
Thank
That
you,
was
dude.
dope. Thanks,
Talk to
dude.
you soon.
All right, see you guys later.
Later, bro.